Everything that we do, every interaction should be like an opportunity to connect people with each other and to connect people with the resources in the community.
We're here today with Pierina Sanchez, a visiting assistant professor at Pratt University, as well as a senior fellow at the Pratt Center for Community Development and a candidate for the New York City 14th Councilmatic District in the Bronx. Pierina, thank you for taking the time to be interviewed.
Of course. Thank you for having me. Thank you for thinking of us.
Personally, how have you been dealing with the pandemic?
I it's been a journey for me in a way that I would never have expected. I mean, nobody could have expected the pandemic. But when the pandemic first struck, I was actually working as a senior advisor at City Hall. And what I witnessed was the way that when there is an emergency and when there's something so big and so drastic that goes and is a challenge before a bureaucracy that never changes, right? We always talk about government, always talk about a Titanic. Instead of shifting ever so slowly, you saw the city of New York just kind of pivot. And so for the first few months of the pandemic, from February, March, April, I was in there and we were sort of remaking the whole way that city government worked. So how was I personally dealing with it? There wasn't really a personal in those beginning months, because you name it and we were trying to do it, right? But I would say that that's not completely true. I would say that, when in the middle of everything that we were trying to do, stand up a hotel program for essential workers so they didn't have to be overcrowded, get more PPE from all parts of the world, all of that kind of stuff. I was also, so fortunate to be able to teach my parents how to use Zoom and be able to spend a lot more time with my siblings and my parents, just kind of every day. Essentially, we found like a half an hour or an hour to just talk it out and see how everybody was doing, make sure that we had our space to share. So family has always been huge in my life, and I'm so blessed to have just an incredible support system. But in that time, it was like we were all going through it together, and that was really great.
So running for office is a challenge in and of itself, right? And then you add a pandemic on top of that. What are the challenges that you face running a campaign during COVID?
It's a sort of a different version of what would happen. So let's say in normal times, you decide you want to run for office, and you're like, "Yo, I got to talk to 15,000 people, and somehow between I have from now until then, and I have to just make sure I touch base with everybody. I meet all these people, and the way I'm gonna do it is I'm gonna knock on their door. I'm gonna be like, hey, Doña Maria, cómo estamos? How we doing? You know, and I'm gonna call them, but mostly I'm gonna meet them face to face, right? That's how an upstart candidate like me, somebody who was, not really coming from the establishment, not really coming from any sort of existing base of support or anything like that. I was coming from the grassroots and coming from just like this vision of, we can do better for District 14. We got this, right? That's how somebody like me would traditionally run for office. And so what happens is, it's kind of like the story with city government. It's like you took the snow globe and you just shook it all up. And instead of being able to meet people door to door, face to face, you had to like get creative and get thinking about not only like, how am I going to meet Doña Maria, who by the way probably isn't on Twitter, right? But also, how am I going to do that in a way that is helping to bring calm, bring resources, bring what we need in this community at this time, right? And so for me, I really started to personally, even before the campaign activities, to just really get involved with some of the really amazing grassroots organizations and organizing that was going on. And there is something called the Bronx Mutual Aid Network. So a mutual aid network is what it sounds like. It's like you help me, I help you. Government is not really involved. It's really just us trying to figure it out and fill in the blanks. And so this Bronx Mutual Aid Network started to come up in the West Bronx, and actually in the West and the East. We have like a little belt across the Bronx. And what we were doing was like, we would post on Facebook and we would say, we need donations, we need donations. And then the donations would come in. And then we would literally go to the supermarket and buy the food, right? And then we would create forms and we would say, all right, world, all right, Bronx, like who needs help? How do you need it? And we found all of these creative ways to in the beginning, it was delivery, right? So we wanted to help mobility impaired seniors, mobility impaired individuals who live in the community to receive groceries from us. And that kind of evolved. And so even now throughout the whole campaign, we've really been, with them and with other community organizations who are like, oh, we want to also, pivot to this direct service work. We have been really providing those services and helping the community in that way.
Everybody running a campaign, whether they're an incumbent or a challenger or they're running for an open seat, they're utilizing their campaigns as a like a volunteer effort to combat COVID. And you were just talking about getting groceries for people that are having difficulty moving around. What other things that your campaign has been doing to help combat COVID and everything that comes with it?
Absolutely. And it's just been so great, by the way, to be able to work with these organizations on the ground, just to be able to do this service work. But with the campaign specifically, I have, I call it like a campaign of service, right? Like everything that we do, every interaction should be like an opportunity to connect people with each other and to connect people with the resources in the community. So I am a salsera. I dance on two, for those of you who might not know what that means. And I have been dancing salsa since, I mean, let's be clear, since the womb, right? I was that baby in the womb dancing, right? But when I was about 14 years old, I took my first salsa class in a school. And basically since then, I have been, on teams and, performing and teaching and all of this stuff. But, that really ramped down a little bit. And I've been doing it way less, as I launched the candidacy. Even when I worked in City Hall, I didn't have a lot of time. And so dance is my passion, right? And salsa is my passion. And what we had going on in the Bronx and in the city, really in the country in the fall, was that we had this race with a limited amount of time to get counted in the census, right? And so what I did is I combined the need with my passion, right? And I did this whole series called Salsa Consensus, where I taught salsa classes socially distant in our parks, right? And I had people like, just strangers. I would just go up to strangers like, hola señora, ¿cómo está? Do you know how to dance salsa? You wanna take a class? We're gonna do this thing. And then they would come and even like people who were like too cool for school, who would just like look from the corner, you would see them like dancing in the corner a little bit, like following along with the class. And at the end of every class, we would say, thank you so much for joining us. Remember that this is who we are. We're a happy people. We're going to figure this out. Also fill out your census. Also, if you need to register to vote, you can come do that with us now. And, just stay in touch with us and let us know what you need. And I'll tell you, like doing that, I can't tell you the number of stories that I learned from the community, from like, oh, actually, I have this immigration issue, or I need a lawyer for this, or I need that. And it's like, I don't know, the way that I see it is that when you are, building in community like that, right? Like using the thing that we're proud of. We're proud of our dancing, we're proud of our music, we're proud of our culture. And you use that to bring people into the civic process and into engaging with their government. Like there's this new level of connection, right? And so a lot of those people, we're still in touch. And that's just one of the examples of like, we do the direct service, but we also use everything we have at our disposal to engage with people at every step.
That's pretty cool. I did want to ask a question about like mental health, and again, it goes along with running a campaign, having to run it a different way because of COVID, and also just, I mean, we're all dealing with it with in our own way.
Yeah.
When it comes to your own, mental health and how you approach it during this time, what are some of the things that you have been doing?
Absolutely. So one thing that I want to just always share at every single opportunity is therapy is amazing. Therapy is fantastic. You just get an hour to work through all of the, difficult challenges that you might be going through. And so absolutely, I'm in between a therapist right now. I'm searching for one, but absolutely therapy is a must, for me, certainly. And then no matter how hard I work, I always, even if it means half an hour less of sleep, which is not ideal, I always just try to decompress at the end of the night, watching some TV, completely disconnecting. And I can't watch like The West Wing. I can't watch that. That's too real, right? Like I can't watch, Olivia Pope. I can't. It's too close to my reality. So I like to watch like, Dungeons and Dragons kind of things, like magicians and magical shows and stuff like that, because it just gives you an opportunity to disconnect from the day to day and just like chill out, right? So I do that all the time. And then the other thing I do, I'll mention three things. I do that. I dance in the dark. And then the third thing is just family time. Whenever I can sneak that in with mommy and with my brothers and my nieces, just hanging out with them.
So with these campaign efforts to, utilizing, the ability and time to um, do anything that you can in order to help with, combating COVID, not just your campaign, but other campaigns, what does that say about, what do you think that says about, Bronxites, New Yorkers, or just people in general?
I love what it says, or at least what I interpret it to say is that we, at the end of the day, even though we have reputations for being a little short sometimes and having attitudes and everything like that, this moment in history is really just showing how resilient we are and how we're there for each other, right? From the essential workers who never stopped, and that's one thing I always talk about, in this campaign and in my community, is that, at the same time that people were like, oh yeah, New York City is a ghost town, everybody's leaving. Not the Bronx. We here, we working, we stocking the shelves, we driving the taxis, we're doing all of these things. And starting from those folks who, no matter what, said, I have to keep going. My job is essential. My kids need me, and this is how I feed my family. From them to all of the folks who have said, you know what, we're not going to wait for government. We're not going to wait for anybody to come and help us. We're just going to figure things out on our own, right? Like I really think that really shows the resilience of New Yorkers, and that at the end of the day, we're good people. We really have each other's backs, and we're going to be there. And for me, that's one of the reasons, that aspect of the COVID response and the COVID response of the on the ground. That's one of the things that excites me so much about running, is because there's a lot of people running who are community oriented in this way. And like, imagine us all in power in the city council and really centering our communities as we govern.
The city council is facing a lot, right? You have, with police reform, still combating COVID, job losses, homelessness, evictions, and not to mention an $8 billion deficit that the city's currently in. But with that said, during this time of COVID, what are some of the things that you feel the the city has done well, and conversely, what are some of the things that you think they can do better at?
Yeah, no, thank you for that, right? Because we, especially as a candidate, you're very used to just talk like poking holes, right? But there are incredible things that the city has done, and that the city, I remember getting calls from other cities across the country being like, "Hey, how did you guys do this? How did you guys do that?" And I think one of the things that has been really incredible and impressive is the way that we have created opportunities for people to isolate during COVID-19. That has helped us. couldn't tell you the numbers exactly, but it has helped us to slow the spread, because the reality is that a lot of our essential workers and a lot of our households, they live in overcrowded conditions, right? There's way too many people. Like, we have an affordability crisis, of course. And so very, very early on, one of the things that the administration prioritized was, let's stand up a hotel program so that nurses, doctors, but then grocery store workers and other essential workers could have space to isolate. That was fantastic. Another thing that we have done really well is, pivot in our response, right? And I mentioned to you in the beginning of our conversation that, I've been working in city government in one way or another for like the past 10 years. And every time that you try to push a policy through, like, no matter how small, it can take like 4 years, 5 years, right? From advocacy up until, policy change, right? And so another thing that I really do applaud the city in doing, and I had less visibility into it, but the state as well, is to pivot the functions of government to be responsive to the crisis. But in terms of what we can do better, I mean, it's the disproportionate impact, right? It's the inequities in the response. And I'll give you one concrete example. On Friday, I walked by one of the public sites where we have testing, not even vaccination, just testing. And there was a line that went, like, stretched all the way down the block. And I asked somebody who was pretty close, maybe like some 6 or 7 people from the door. I asked them, how long have you been here? And they said 3 hours. 3 hours waiting for a test, and they were not yet at the front. And being who I am, and wanting to make sure that I have an understanding for what this looks like in other parts of the city, I called up a friend in the Upper West Side. I called up friends in other parts of the city that have different demographics, put it that way, and no lines, right? We're talking about same amount of same city, same, we know the numbers everywhere. We have one of the highest rates of COVID-19 in this community. And we also have very few testing sites, and this is what our lines look like, right? And so, look, there's a lot of reasons for the inequities. There's a lot of, there's one reason for the inequities, right? Like, there's systematic, intergenerational disinvestment and inequality and oppression that we face. But the way that this manifests, like, these are fixable things, right? Add more testing sites, right? With the vaccine rollout, we saw the news break about how so many people were coming from outside of the city and using up our vaccine resources, right? Like, make there be a residency requirement, right? So these are all addressable problems in terms of the COVID-19 response and the way that it's led to inequities. But what you need to have is, you need to say, like, razor focus. We already know where the challenges are going to be, even before they happen. We already know, right? Because we have all of history to tell us who is going to be hurt the most and where the pain is going to be felt the most acutely. And so what we need to do is we need to plan in advance for dealing with these challenges, right? And that's one of the things that has always been my lens, because I grew up with it, right? Like, I grew up with it. I've been working against it for the last 10 years of my career, everywhere from, Harvard and Princeton, where I was, one of the only people who was, a person of color, one of the only people from the Bronx, right? And seeing the differences in how students came in with resources and not, to working in City Hall, to working at a nonprofit. Like, you always see it in every single setting. So since we know we're going to see it, we need to plan ahead. And when you're planning that rollout, you can't just say, we're going to do an online form. All you have to do is go on Twitter and you will see. Sorry, not to pick on Twitter, but yeah, like, all you need to do is log into Twitter and all your answers will be solved. Well, what about people who don't have access to Twitter, right? And that almost always is us, right? So I think that's really it, is planning for what is going to come in terms of those inequities.
What are some of the things that you're campaigning on, and what are some of the things that you're passionate about addressing?
I'll start with this, right? One of my very first memories as a child, right, must have been like 3 or 4 years old, is waking up in the middle of the night to screams, the strong smell of smoke, all of this commotion. My mom yelling to wake me up and to wake my brothers up, and running downstairs and then looking upstairs to our walk-up building and just seeing flames coming out of the building. And what that story came to be was my very first experience, in my memory anyway, of tenant harassment, right? And so the story goes in the family that there were some tenants in the building who happened to be my mom and my aunt. They were family, lived in the same building. They had dared to speak out because there was no heat, no hot water, there weren't repairs, there were rodents and all these things. And they spoke out for their rights. And this landlord decided to harass them, right? And they, in this case, they had started a fire, which became my first memory, right? Kind of thing that happened in the 70s and 80s. They did it for less, right? In that time period. And although the details have changed, the reality has not. The harassment has not. The insecurity of, can I pay my rent? Or if I speak out, will I be evicted or harassed, right? All of these things have not changed. And so for me, I'm grounded always in like, dang, like that's what I went through and it's still happening. We got to make a change, right? We got to really focus on affordable housing. We got to focus on, tenant protections. So I think a lot about home ownership, and how if the equation was different and we actually owned our properties, we would be more secure in our community. So that's one. And then what does it take for us to become homeowners? What does it take for us to stabilize in our communities? That brings me to jobs, right? That brings me to making sure to work with our unions in the city to grow, right? My family has a lot of union members in it. And I'm so proud that a lot of the unions have been coming out in support of our campaign, because I want to center them, right? I want to grow. The more they grow, the better my community is doing, because we're one and the same, those members in the community. And then the third piece of it is really around education, right? For me, I went to public schools, and then I got scholarships, and I went to after school programs and things like that. And I was able to go to Harvard and Princeton on full rides, right? And when you really invest in a young person and you really believe in them, they will show out, right? And I really believe that, there's so much potential in our community. And what we need to do as legislators, as leaders, is we need to tap that potential that already exists, so that our kids can be the best versions of themselves.
You mentioned a personal experience in your personal life, in your professional life. What helps you address these issues?
Actually, I'm really glad that you asked this question, because one's resume, or one's sort of like your list of professional experiences, that's not everything, right? Like, it is so important to me, and actually my personal experiences have shaped the decisions that I have made and the career trajectory, right? Because if I didn't have those personal experiences of knowing what it's like to hear somebody ridicule my mom because she didn't speak the language. My mom is hard of hearing, right? To hear them, to hear people ridicule her for like, don't you hear me? Like, right? To have these personal experiences growing up with my family as I did, and watching these abuses, and then being in the community and seeing them play out. If it wasn't personal to me, I dare say that I wouldn't be the same kind of advocate, right? And I dare say that I wouldn't pursue the work that I do with the passion and like relentlessness. Like I don't if I don't have to sleep, if it means that I don't have to sleep to get something done, I won't sleep, right? You have to, take care of yourself at the end of the day. But honestly, like there have been so many times that I've been working on something so passionately because I know what it means for people in the community, right? And for me, that has played out in many different ways, but I'll give you one example, which is when I was an urban planner. because I'm a nerd and I'm very proud of it. When I was an urban planner working for an organization called Regional Plan Association, it's a think tank, right? We think about policies that, can help us get the region of New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut prepared with the right kind of investments to get into the 21st century, the 22nd century, right? Like think about the future in the long, long term. And I had this one project that was my project, and it was thinking about gentrification and displacement in the region. And I remember that, any nonprofit will always have resource issues, right? Like you're always going to be a little bit strapped for cash. You always have more work than you have bandwidth with the people. But I had it in my head that I wanted to do this research project about what gentrification looks like and doesn't look like across different cities, everywhere from Newburgh and Kingston in New York to Trenton to New Haven and back home, right? And so I had it in my head that I wanted to do this research project, but I also wanted to make sure that it wasn't just looking at numbers, but it was the lived experience of people, right? But it was just me, right? It was just me and like one other person in the office who also felt passionately about it. And what we did was that, we made an itinerary and we found some like 20 people to interview. So we crunched all the numbers and then we went all over zigzagging and driving and interviewed all of these people so that they can tell their personal stories, right? And that has like, I still use that report to this day. I still see it used to this day, where people pull it up to say like, look at what is happening in New York City, look at what's happening all across the region. So that's something that if I didn't have that personal experience, I probably would have, here's the numbers, here's the tables, bye. Right? But instead it became this, document that lives on forever, in many ways, and informs a lot of policymaking in New York City and in the region.
Why you? Why now? What makes you the best candidate?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's definitely me. It's definitely now, and here's why. um, Look, it's we're going through a tough moment in history, right? We in New York City, we are going to have a new mayor, a new set of borough presidents, new controller, 30 new council members at least, right? Because there might be some additional seats. And what that means is that you are going to have a whole lot of new people who potentially have never been in government before, might be incredible advocates in different ways. But in me, you have somebody who is an incredible advocate and has been in government before, right? In me, you have somebody who's going to hit the ground running. I already know what I want to do in my first 100 days, right? And have the know-how to navigate that and really start on day one delivering results for District 14. And so for me, it's really this is a labor of love, of passion for this community. I believe in us. I believe that we can do it with the right supports and investments. And I'm ready to go on day one.
So, is there anything that you'd like to add that hasn't been addressed today?
Yeah. We've covered a lot of ground, and again, thank you for this opportunity. I really do appreciate it. I would say, just to kind of put a finer point on the importance of unions and union jobs in this district in particular, but also in the city of New York. And that is that, growing up, I had, like I mentioned, there was several people in my family they had union jobs. They were the backstops, right? They were always the ones that, even if fulanito or this one, lost their job, they would always be able to say, I'll help you with this month's rent, right? And so for me, it's when I think about how do you stabilize the economy of your community, I think about the fact that unions play such a big role, not only just on paper and with the numbers, but also in terms of, what they do for their families, for their extended families, and then in turn for their communities. So I'm very thankful for the union support, because that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna do everything we can to stabilize the community through creating good jobs, and it's gonna make a difference for our people.
Pierina Sanchez, thank you so much for taking the time. I wish you lots of luck and lots of success. Hopefully, everything goes well and we'll get to chat again. And
Absolutely.
next time with you with a different title.
There you go. Thank you so much.